What's up, everybody? This is a continuation of our last conversation, which had to do with compression ratios and burn of fuel, burn rates and stuff. So we're going to do a little class here. This will be a lot of fun. And this is kind of a boring video because it's just me on the iPad, but hopefully the information is exciting enough to keep you involved. So this is our piston, our rod. We'll do, oop, I have no idea what just happened. This is our, we'll say the piston wrist pin. And then you've got like an exhaust valve, an intake valve, and air comes in, mixes, and then most applications nowadays, the spark plug is in the middle. And when the spark plug ignites, the air and fuel burn in a outward direction. Back in the day, because of manufacturing limitations, pistons were designed like this, and they had a pinch side, and the spark plug existed over here, and it would burn everything from here and push out, but it's still, the motion would push the piston down. So, but that was back in the day. We're talking about more modern technology now. So the way the fuel burns is it's supposed to propagate. So if we look at it from the top, your spark plug's in the middle, and it burns outward like this, evenly, in even direction. So everything kind of just whoosh, like that. There's what's called burn rate. And that burn rate is how fast the fuel burns to get from one end to the other. And that's important because you're talking about expansion. So let's talk about timing for a second. So we'll draw a little graph here. And on this graph, we're gonna have spark timing, right? Got our spark. And then here we're gonna have power. Now, when you're timing an engine, you're looking for what's called mean best torque, which is considered MBT. Now, mean best torque is basically the amount of power that the engine can make via a certain spark timing. Mean best torque moves around depending on boost, depending on engine application, depending on all sorts of things, but basically it's your burn rate. So we're gonna build a little wave here, all right? Now, if we have a super backed off timing, retarded timing, you're talking about lighting the fuel way late, you're not gonna see very much power because you're igniting the piston as it's already on its way down. So not only do you have the momentum of the piston coming down, but also, you know, it's already beyond the crankshaft rotation point that would be considered a solid push, if you will. The way to think about this, without thinking about it as an engine, is when you're on a bicycle and you've got your pedals, right? And this is your pedal, this is your other pedal, and you're pushing with your feet. You know, here's your leg and your foot, and you're pushing down. You don't wait till the pedal is over here before you start to push it down. If you're trying to accelerate as fast as you can, you stand up on the bike and you're pushing down as soon as the pedal is right past top dead center, which would be straight up. And once it's right past that, you drop your weight down on it, and it puts a lot of leverage on this shaft that then helps rotate your chain that goes to the back, right? And that's what helps your back wheel propel. So that right there is what you're doing with the engine, but your leg is now the spark plug, and your weight of your body pushing down is the gas and fuel energy that's helping push the piston down. Now, what limits you to having the correct ignition timing? There's a couple different things. So here's our graph again. This is pushing the pedal down too late. And as you advance ignition timing, what starts to happen is your power starts to go up. And eventually it'll start to peak. And then once you peak, this right here is what's called MBT. That was terrible. MBT is the mean best torque you can get out of the engine. So once you're pushing your vehicle or engine up to MBT, once you pass MBT, now you're starting to try and push the piston down before it reaches that. Basically, the best location for it is 15 degrees past top dead center. So after top dead center. Now, if 15, oh my goodness, I don't know why that's happening. If 15 degrees is, if 15 degrees after top dead center is when you're trying to push the piston down, why is the spark happening before then? Because you're not timing it for the spark to be at 15 degrees after top dead center, you want the highest cylinder pressure to be after top dead center, 15 degrees. So the way to do that is you have to ignite the fuel before this point. And that's what gets the fuel burning, and then the fuel is at its maximum expansion rate and your cylinder pressures are as high as they can be to help push the piston down. And that's what's generating your higher level of power, right? So MBT, tune it up to MBT, you're good. And as soon as you start going past MBT, now you're in a realm where you're pushing the engine backwards, and that's not gonna work. If you have enough octane in your fuel, you can go past MBT and you're not gonna detonate. It will just burn and it won't do anything else except try and push the engine backwards, which eventually puts a lot of stress on the rod. That's a problem because now you're putting too much stress on the rod. Now, what limits you from getting to MBT? It's the octane rating of the fuel. So if you're running a 93 octane pump gas, right? 93 octane, and you're starting to pump a bunch of boost into it. So now you're building the cylinder pressure up before the piston comes up because you're shoving all this air into it. What happens is, this is the upward view of the cylinder again. It'll light the fuel, but because the fuel's so unstable because of the environment it is inside of the combustion chamber, the fuel might start to, this is really frustrating. The fuel might start to burn in a direction that is basically like this. And so now this section of the fuel is burned and this section was not, because the environment's so intense, the fuel starts to become unstable. Well, what happens is these two burn points, that is gonna make me throw this iPad. The two burn points that are separate, right? They start to come together and they clash. Now that is considered knock. There's a couple of different things. Pre-ignition or over-ignition is you have your ignition timing too advanced, which can lead to knock. Detonation is there's a point in the combustion chamber that is allowing the fuel to catch before you actually light the spark plug. That's a different style of problem. But the important thing is that the fuel is too unstable to propagate correctly. Now, here is something that will really send you for a whirl. Lean conditions don't usually burn the motor. What usually breaks an engine is over ignition timing or your unstable fuel. Why is that? Well, aluminum, so this is your aluminum piston. Aluminum burns at like, I think it's like 1100 or 1200 degrees, right? And that's when aluminum starts to turn into a liquid. And that's obviously a problem. But, and you'll learn this if you ever do welding, there's an oxide layer that exists over the aluminum. And that's why aluminum doesn't corrode, because it has this oxide layer that protects it. Well, that oxide layer doesn't melt or go away until 3600 degrees. Now, that doesn't mean you can take the piston to that temperature, but you can get the piston really hot and really close to, you know, some temperatures of like 1300 and 1400 degrees inside of the combustion chamber. But what happens is that temperature's there and gone before it damages the piston. So the piston itself has this little protective layer, and that's honestly what those other coatings, ceramic coatings and stuff do for the piston, is it develops this nice little protective layer to actually protect the aluminum from hitting that 1100, 1200 degrees internally, because once that happens, it melts. Now, when you have that fuel that's unstable and those two flame fronts clash into each other and they clap, it creates a lot of energy of a pop. And that's the detonation you hear. That's the sound of that's the sound of detonation, is those two flame fronts clapping into each other. Well, when that happens, it's actually disruptive enough that it breaks away. I actually needed it that time. It breaks away the oxide layer, and you're left with just the pure aluminum. Now you have pure aluminum touching this 1400 degrees, and that's what melts the side of the piston. So you'll have a condition where you pull your engine apart and you've got a hole in the side of your piston and it melted through, And, you know, now you've got this engine that looks like it went lean. So you put bigger injectors in it, but you didn't realize that it's the spark advance that was actually what damaged the motor. So when you run it, even though you're still fueling correctly, you end up going lean, or not going lean, but you end up melting the piston anyway again, because the spark advance and the detonation is actually what caused the issue. Hence why a tune is so important. So that kind of explains octane ratings and why you would have to step up. So octane, if you're running 93 and you start to see pre-detonation, you can advance yourself into like 105, or I used to use 114 Renegade. And doing that allows you to push the engine to MBT. So for example, you know, if our octane rating was limiting us to here, well, this is all the power we can make out of that motor, because that's the engine itself is an environment that's too problematic for 93 octane. It won't make it. So as we increase our octane, it allows us to advance our ignition timing up to what is MBT. You can't go past MBT because this is the mechanical limit as to how early you can hit the ignition timing. So, but if we can keep our fuel stable enough to push it all the way to MBT, we're solid. So for example, I had a car that made 504 wheel horsepower, right? On regular pump gas. And on that pump gas, as I was advancing ignition timing, I ended up making it to 16 degrees of ignition advance at the top end. So at 16 degrees, I made 504 horsepower. That's not too bad. Well, I put in some Renegade fuel, which was running 114 octane, and I was able to advance ignition timing back to, honestly, where it was naturally aspirated on our other fuel. And MBT on that motor ended up being 26 degrees of ignition timing, and it made 536. Same setup, same everything, but I put in a better fuel, and the fuel didn't necessarily make more power. It was the fact I was able to push the ignition timing up into MBT that allowed me to make this horsepower. So this car was making this horsepower anyway, but because of my lower octane rating, I could only hit right here before the fuel started to become unstable. The burn rate started to become unstable, and it limited me to 504 horsepower. Now, let's talk E85. I know that's what probably most of you guys came in here for, but it was important to understand octane rating and everything before we got to that point. So we understand our MBT table and how power and spark advance changes and how that works. You can see this on the dyno. And we also understand where the spark plug is and how it works and how it translates from this into mechanical energy. Also, an engine, you have to worry about mechanical drag. So that's so many things that go into mechanical drag. But keep in mind, these numbers I'm about to give you are strictly for, we're taking mechanical drag out of the equation. So I've got a couple numbers I want to write down for you. So we got E85 first. And in E85, one of the most important numbers is the fact that it's a 9.8 to 1 stoichiometric air-fuel ratio. So that means for, every 9.8 molecules of oxygen, we burn 1 molecule of fuel, okay? And then the next important number to have is this fuel makes an energy of 26.8 kilojoules per gram. And what I want you to understand is, as I write this stuff down, it's not important to know and understand these numbers, just the concept I'm about to show you. And then also 105 octane. And now let's compare that to gasoline. So gasoline equals 14.7, which a lot of us are very familiar with that number, to 1 stoichiometric ratio. And then gasoline is more powerful than E85. So gasoline makes 33.52 kilograms per gram. And then it's also a lower octane of 93 octane. So fuel to fuel, gasoline generates more energy than E85 does, which is what scared people away from E85 for the longest time. But why is E85 so good? The reason is because you're not looking at how much fuel you're burning. Well, I take that back. You're not looking at how much energy you're making per the same gram of fuel. What you want to look at is how much energy you're creating per pound of oxygen. That's the super important thing. And what makes the difference is this number. You're burning more E85 per pound of oxygen than you are gasoline. So even though the number's less, you're burning more of it for how much air you're ingesting. And then here's another thing that's very interesting. Everybody thinks 14.7 to 1 is the way to go. Honestly, if you're running an old car, like a 96, 2004 Mustang, before they started putting 10% ethanol in fuels, if you're running 14.7 to 1 in your tune, you probably should get it retuned, because nowadays everything is E10. Everything can contain up to 10% ethanol. Therefore, it's E10. Well, E10's air-fuel ratio for stoichiometric is 14.08. So every single car that's still ready for gasoline, even on the stock tune, when you go to E10, you're actually missing out on this number. There's a parameter inside of the tune for, you know, Mustangs and stuff that say actually every tune basically, what is the stoichiometric ratio of the fuel that we're running. And it's part of the calculation that goes into the tune for the computer. And if it doesn't know that it's 14.08, it's tuning as if it's on 14.7 to 1. Therefore, any fuel you're putting in there is not the right fuel. So I was going to use the calculator on here so you could see me do the calculation, but the calculator on here is trying to get me to buy stuff from Home Depot, so we're not going to do that. All right, so 50 liters of air to a ratio divided by 9.8 to 1 air-fuel ratio, AFR, right? So 50 liters of air, 9.8 to 1 AFR, and then that comes out to 5.10 liters of E85. So 5.1 liters of E85, and then you multiply that by this 26.8 kilojoules. But so we're actually going to have to convert that to kilojoules per liter, because we're talking in liters here. So 26.8 kilojoules per gram would be, and we're going to multiply this, would be 26,800. So 5.1 liters times 26,800 kilojoules per liter comes out to a number of 136.680 kilojoules per 50 liters of air. This is the number. So if your motor is ingesting 50 liters of air at a stoichiometric ratio with this amount of energy per liter, you come out to 136,680 kilojoules of energy for every 50 liters of air that you ingest through that motor. So that's E85. Very cool. So let's write that number over here, 136,680 kilojoules per 50 liters of air. That is sloppy, but we don't care. All right, now let's do the same equation for gasoline. Now we got 50 liters divided by 14.7 to 1 AFR equals, ended up being 3.55 liters of fuel. So 3.55 liters of fuel is being burned. Now, at 33,520 kilograms per liter, so 3.55 liters times 33,520 kilojoules equals 119,034 kilojoules per 50 liters of oxygen. Now compare this number. Oh my God. I hate it so much. 119,034 kilojoules. So compare this. I'm going to leave this in the video because I think this is hilarious. 0, 3, 4. I'm not even going to write it. So this number compared to this number. This number with gasoline, this number for E85. Sorry, I got confused. I thought those were backwards. E85. And this is gas. So I'll explain that one last time. Then again, it's not understanding the equation. You don't need the numbers. You just have to have the concept in your head. And these numbers move around because not every time you fill up at the gas station, it's going to be E85. Not every time you fill up at the gas station, you're going to have E10. You might have E5, like who knows? But the car kind of adjusts for it. The goal is to get the tune as close as possible. But what we're going over today is if I'm driving my car and I'm getting 50 liters of air through the engine, and the engine is measured that way, it's grams per second on an AFR gauge. Or no, sorry, on your MAF, on your mass airflow meter, it's grams per second. That's how it calculates. So we're doing things a little bit different. We're doing liters, and we're not giving it an amount of time. We're just figuring out how many kilojoules of energy that we're creating per the amount of fuel that we're burning. But for the same amount of air on both equations, multiplied and divided by what we need to get out to how many kilojoules of energy it's creating for that same amount of air, at the end of the day, E85 is generating 136,680 kilojoules per every 50 liters of air, whereas your gasoline's only doing 119. So E85 does in fact make more power per pound of air that the engine is ingesting, and that is the calculation. It's per pound of air. When somebody tells you that E85 is not as strong as a fuel as gasoline, that is true. But the fact that we're burning more E85 for how much air the engine is ingesting, that's what determines how much fuel or how much air or energy you're going to get at the end of the day. When you do let's say a Coyote motor or some naturally aspirated motor and switch it to E85, you're probably not going to see much because E85, it's a multiplier. So if we took that 119, right, 320, whatever it was, and you multiplied both of these numbers by 2, the gap between the energy you're making on E85 and the energy you're making on gasoline will become larger. So that's why the more boost and everything you run in a car, E85 responds even better and better and better and better, and it's because it's a multiplier. So NA cars do well with E85, and it will generate a little more power, but as you boost and boost and boost, the more air you bring in, the larger the gap becomes between the two different fuels. And then the other beautiful part of E85 is it's 105 octane. So not only are you getting more energy per pound of air that you bring in, but if you're limited to 93 right here, and your 105 that you're getting out of E85 allows you closer to your MBT, now not only did you utilize more energy per pound of air that you're ingesting in the car, but you were able to advance your ignition timing up closer to MBT and create more energy out of the mechanical part of the motor than you would on on 93. So that is a huge, huge piece as to why E85 is a really good fuel to go to. Why is E85 bad? There's really not much to it, but because the fuel ratio is different, you do end up burning like 30% more fuel. And so therefore your efficiency, which is actually called BSFC, and BSFC is your rating of efficiency on a motor, and that is brake specific fuel consumption. How much fuel consumption do you have to create a certain amount of brake horsepower? And on E85, your brake specific fuel consumption is much, much, much higher than it is on gasoline. You want that number to be as low as possible, and that means efficiency. So that kind of goes into play there. And then also, like, you have to consider what you're doing with the fuel. If you're running an NA motor and you're doing circuit track stuff and you're doing endurance racing, you're probably going to want something closer to gasoline because you're not limited on MBT with using gasoline. You might not make as much power, but you can make the power for a lot longer because you're not having to refuel as often because you're not consuming fuel like E85 is. So that's pretty much it. I hope that brought in a lot of really good information for y'all. I know this was a little long and wordy, but it's a good piece of information, and I hope y'all like it. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna be dumping a lot more stuff on here. I'm gonna have a video up soon about rear ends and how differentials work and everything else. I know that's a topic most people probably already know, but it's I'm gonna have 2 differentials on the ground, and I'm gonna show you a couple cool things between the 2 differentials. So like, subscribe, enjoy. Remember, low key quick on Instagram, QUIK. I love this iPad. No, I don't. I hate it because my handwriting sucks. All right, y'all have a good day. Appreciate it.